I feel like an idiot. Because if I had known it was going to be this easy to straighten out the quarter on that car, I would have done it 10 years ago. I'm going to show you how I did all of this in a minute. Before I do that, the coronet in the junkyard. We had a lot of comments. Go buy the coronet. Go pick up the coronet. You know what? I would have grabbed that car in a heartbeat, and I probably would have even overpaid for it because I felt it needed to be saved. The problem is, in these pull parts, at least here in Tennessee, once a car is in there, once they've received the title, they cannot sell it. They can't sell any part of it that has a VIN number on it. So they can't sell, on that car, they couldn't sell the door jamb because the VIN number is riveted to the door jamb. Anything with vehicle identification on it, they can't sell. So, it's in there for good, it's parts, it's gone forever. All right, now to this. When I bought this car, obviously the rear quarter had been crunched, and at a glance you could see the frame rail was bent. So one of the first things I did was I talked to a body guy that I knew, and I said, what would you do with this? And he was like, well, you know, it's kinked here, it's got a ripple there, blah, 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 blah. He says, your most efficient way is just find another charger, cut the quarter panel at the, at the front of the frame rail, and just graft the whole section in. You'll save yourself a ton of trouble. All right, that's easier said than done. These things don't grow on trees, especially with good solid quarters. And this thing is rust-free, and this car's solid, but it was accordioned. So I started making a plan at that point. How am I going to cut this? So I studied it out, and I was like, okay, if I cut it at the kink, and I cut it along here, and I cut it here, and I cut it here, and I liberate, and blah, 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 I'll be able to move everything back into position. I even went and bought this whole assortment of Sawzall blades, all different lengths and everything, so I can get into nooks and crannies. As it turns out, I didn't need any of that. This was a snap. So let's show you. I'll go step by step what I did here. Right. The first thing is I positioned these jacks at the farthest forward point, so that 100% of the weight of the car would be behind them. Like if I put the jacks in a traditional place, as I tried to lift the rear, it would teeter-totter, but doing it this way, as I'm putting pressure on the rear, jacking up the back quarter panel of the car, 100% of the car's weight would be on that. So that was the first thing. So now the second thing I did was come around. Okay, be careful of the, I left everything pretty much the way I was working on it. So if you come in here, I took the Sawzall and I went to the middle of the kink and I cut it straight up. Now, an interesting thing happened there. You know, if you're familiar with cutting frame rails, if you don't cut them just right, the Sawzall blade will get caught. But in this case, it didn't. It didn't open up, the gap didn't open up, but the blade didn't get caught, even when I got to the top of the frame rail, which meant that everything wanted to spring back, which was an excellent sign. So what I did at that point was I positioned this jack at the back of the frame rail, and I jacked it up. And as I'm jacking it, I'm hearing the body of the car going, it's making all kinds of noises, right? And he says, this is a good sign. This is a good sign. Once I got it to where it wasn't going to raise anymore, and then I checked, and there was a droop here, and there was a dent here. And when I checked to the other side with the jack under there, this was even with the other side. Awesome. So at that point, come back over here. I took two pieces of steel and I wedged them into the frame. So here's the top one, and the bottom one is just a little bit thicker. So that right there, that gap is the distance that it took to get the back of the car up. That's what all it was. And these wedges will stay in here. I'll trim this, and then actually just weld them in, fill in this gap, and well, this is even with the bottom over here. So, and of course I'll do it on the inside also, but that's it. That was the distance that I needed to raise this thing to straighten it out. But there was still a ton of tension here in the quarter panel. Now, when we started this was out about 3 inches. And then this was in, and then this was out. So the whole thing was distorted in such a way, and this was in. It was distorted in such a way that it was all shrunk together, but it didn't want to release that easily. So my initial plan was, once the frame was cut, I was going to cut around the floor of the car, or I should say around the frame rail, and separate the quarter panel from it. I doped it out a little bit, and I says, all right, if we push this in, if I beat this section in, and I beat this section out of the back of the wheelhouse, it'll relieve the bulk of the tension. And then this should push everything in the direction I wanted to go. And it did. It worked out perfectly. As I was beating this, this actually started coming in all on its own. I didn't have to touch it. But this was still in. So what I did was, I took a small floor jack right here, and I wedged it between this piece here and the skin of the car, and I pushed it out. I used this as a ram and pushed out on the quarter. Then with the tension on this, I was able to work this seam back out again, or this crease. And then once this crease was worked out, that was it. Okay, now I can stop. Because at this stage, this is all just body work. I have low spots here, I have a low spot here, I have a high spot here and there. But I can, hammer and dolly is nearly impossible in this because of the way, even if I take the interior out, I still can't get at this from the inside. But now I'll consult with Kiwi and see what Kiwi would do to get this section straight. Worst comes to worst, if I have to cut it here and graft in a fresh section of metal, it's not a big deal. But I honestly believe that this can be worked to where it's not going to take a lot of plastic to make it happy. So, but overall, even this little section here, these quarter stampings are so intricate because all Carnets are like that, especially if you look like the 69s, right? That generation. The rear quarter stampings on Carnets are so intense. And that's the way this thing is here too. It has so many different angles to the bulges and so on and so forth that getting them straight is crazy. And I'm not a body man. But like I said, at this stage of the game now, I'm down to just ripples and sections that need to be worked out. So I'll consult with Kiwi and figure out what the best way to do this is. Like I said, if I knew it was going to be this easy, I would have done this 10 years ago. I got maybe 4 hours total in this, and one single cut with the Sawzall, and the rest of it was just like I said, just jacking it and just slowly working it, finding a ripple, finding an ink, and just hammering it out, and that restored all of the car's straightness. We're good to go. And of course, with this, in this particular case, because of the way the brake is, because of where the brake is, it would be impossible for this to actually come back down, because as the weight of the car is sitting on it, this section is being pushed up. So it's not like I have to worry about this thing springing back or anything like that, where it's going to re-distort itself, because like I said, the weight of the car is actually in favor of keeping this taut. So this is a win. It was a win. It was an easy win. And I avoid stuff like this because, like I said, I'm not a body guy. I really don't like doing any sort of body work. But I'm thrilled with this. If you're confronted with a situation like this, don't be afraid. Seriously, don't be afraid. I put this off for years. Every time I walk past this car, I would cringe and think of this monumental task that I've got in front of me to fix it. And as it turns out, this was a snap. I mean, this really was easy. And she's straight again. So I'm going to leave this for the time being, and my next step with this car is I got to drop the exhaust out of it, and I got to drop the transmission out of it, rebuild the transmission, and then I got to figure out what to do with the interior. Because, well, not so much the interior, but the dashboard. This thing is a mess. None of these gauges work. You can see this is all broken out over here. the electroluminescent stuff, because these clusters don't have light bulbs in them. It's a electroluminescent. It's a piece of plastic that glows when you put electricity to it. And there's a 220 volt transformer that goes with this. It's a whole elaborate setup. So none of this works, and all of the wiring up underneath is a mess. It's a rat's nest under there. So I've got to figure out what to do with that yet. And also the headlight doors, because these things have electric headlight doors. And there's a system, it's behind the glove compartment on the passenger side. There's a whole system in there of 3 relays, and they work along with relays that are under in front, built-in stop relays. That are built into this whole deal, and it's a nightmare. What I've done with this car since I've had it was just running at night. I flip the headlights up, and then daytime use, you just roll them right back down again. But I do want to get these to where they function the way they're supposed to. Somebody in the comments of that video with the car in it made the suggestion, well, why don't you just take the whole dashboard out of the car in it, and with a wiring harness, and stick it in this car. And as a last resort, I may do that, and I've already got a complete dashboard, everything, 100% of it from a 67 car in it, in my attic, waiting to put it in this car just in case the dashboard is more than I want to deal with. Because again, like I said, it's a driver. This isn't going to be a restoration thing. It's not. This is supposed to be a fun daily driver type of thing that just take out and run around. So I'm having it 100% original or 100%, perfect. That's not in the game plan here. But great progress. I'm very happy with what's going on, and we'll move on to the next step. So that's it. Don't be afraid to tackle the stuff you don't know how to do. I mean, really, it's metal. What's the worst that can happen? You mess with things like wood, let's just say. You make a bad cut, and it's like, oh, it's all over. I got to start all over again. This is metal. If you make a bad cut, weld it back together again and make another cut. Do whatever you have to do. Don't be afraid of working on this stuff. 100% happy with the results so far. So that's it, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.